Okay. Okay, so today we're talking about supporting literacy learning in Grid. And so we're going to just start by introducing ourselves. My name's Anita. I'm an AAC content specialist at Smartbox. My background before joining Smartbox was as a special educational needs teacher. So I worked in classrooms, I worked with children with various different conditions, diagnoses and needs.
I'm Daisy Clay. I'm the head of the content team at Smartbox in the R&D teams. And my background is I'm a speech and language therapist and specialising in AAC.
So today we're going to be thinking about literacy learning, and we're going to start by thinking about why should we teach literacy, and particularly why should we teach literacy for people who use AAC, and what's the particular importance of that. We're going to look at some case studies from amongst our Grid users. So we'll introduce you to some of our users and think a little bit about their experience of literacy with their AAC. And then we're going to talk about how we can support literacy progression for AAC learners. And towards the end of the webinar, we'll look at some particular features in our Grid vocabularies and also in our Grid software. So why teach literacy? What's so important about it? Why do we think it's such a great idea? Literacy gives people the power to express their own ideas, and that's using their own words and putting the words in the order that they want to, and how they want to express things. It allows people to build independence, so they may have access to things that they wouldn't have without literacy, and it gives them full control over their own voice. So beyond just the words that someone else has chosen to add to an AAC system, it allows people to use whatever language, whatever vocabulary they want. So as literacy skills grow, they can help people to expand their vocabulary, to explore new language, to build longer sentences and different ways of expressing the same thing, and to share more complex ideas. With literacy, individuals can type out their own words and sentences, as we just spoke about, and importantly, can put those words in whichever order they want. They can exchange one word for another word. They can choose which words they're using. They can independently add new vocabulary. So very often, particularly symbol AAC users are very dependent on the words that someone else has chosen for them. And they may want to add, for example, the name of a movie they saw last week, or the name of a shop that they want to go to, or their friends' names. And without literacy, they're dependent on the people around them to add those words into their AAC system. But with literacy, they can work towards adding those words themselves, or simply typing them out as needed. Literacy also allows people to communicate beyond face-to-face interactions. So it gives people access to communication methods such as text messages, WhatsApp, emails, and that might be via accessible apps, for example, built into Grid 3, or it might be that they're contributing to another form of communication that someone else is supporting them with. With literacy, individuals can also fully participate in literacy-based activities like reading books or sharing stories, writing their own stories perhaps. All of the things become possible with literacy skills. And at a more practical level, it also allows people to follow written instructions. So quite a lot of our adult lives involve following instructions, whether that's for work or how to make up a particular food item, or how to follow directions to get somewhere. With literacy, you're able to access all of those types of things. And more. Many more examples, I'm sure, of how literacy can support someone. So now some research that illustrates why literacy teaching is so particularly important for AAC users. So we know from the research that up to 90% of people with developmental disabilities and complex communication needs do not develop functional literacy at all. So that's obviously something that we'd like to see change and improve, and I think highlights the importance of putting a focus on literacy learning for AAC users. Because some later research shows us that AAC users who do develop literacy skills are therefore more likely to succeed in education, to gain independence, and to access employment. So really critical skill for people to be able to participate more fully in an independent life.
So when we think about literacy and supporting literacy progression, I think it's quite easy to feel a bit overwhelmed when you think about achieving literacy. Okay, we need to teach literacy and get this person from a place where they can't read and write to somewhere where they can read and write. And I think understandably that feels really huge and a lot to try and think about all at once. But we want to try and shift that thinking in this webinar and think more about literacy as a collection of skills. It's not just you can read and write or you can't. There are lots of different skills that can develop to support someone's literacy progress, and they will develop at different rates as well. So you might think about it as starting to identify the first sounds in words and start to hear when those sounds are different in words. Or they might even start to recognise a word without decoding the different sounds, just see a word and be able to read it. So whole word recognition. We'll talk more about these skills as the webinar goes on, but there are these different skills that develop at different rates, and we want to think about opportunities to develop all of those different skills to help someone progress. And we know that in some populations, so some people who are using AAC might be more likely to learn to read using whole word recognition. So it's particularly prevalent in autism to, rather than decode the word one sound at a time, to just see a word and read it. So we want to think about all those different skills. Next slide. Cool. So we also want to think about how literacy supports can be embedded into someone's AAC system. So how are the grid sets designed, how the vocabularies, and how is the software able to support someone's literacy? Rather than it being something separate or something extra, there is, of course, definitely a place for specific literacy teaching and having time to teach literacy, but we also, particularly in this webinar, want to think about those opportunities within someone's AAC system, because like with any skill that we're learning, the more opportunities we have to practice, the better our skills will develop. And we know that in mainstream schools, so my son is attending a mainstream school and he is being taught literacy every day, multiple times throughout the day. So there are lots of opportunities. And we know that children with complex needs might have fewer opportunities. So they might be spending more time having their physical needs met or having sensory teaching. So they might not have as many opportunities. So how can we maximise that through their AAC system? So we wanted to introduce you to some lovely grid users and think about the ways that they are engaging with literacy. So this is Vega, and you can read more about Vega on our website actually. So we've got a really nice case study and you can hear all about her. But just thinking about literacy specifically, she uses VocoChat in Grid. And she's actually using mixed access methods. So she's got a grid pad with eye gaze that she uses, but she's also sometimes using touch access on her iPad. And most importantly, she loves books, really loves reading. She loves being read to, but she also likes using her devices to access reading and to read out loud. We'll hear a bit more about that later on. So she's really motivated by reading, going to the library, choosing more books. So it's really important. So it'll be good for us to think about how she is accessing literacy and supporting her literacy development using grid and her vocabularies. So next up, we have Asher, who's the same age as Vega actually, and he's using Supercore on a TalkPad. And he's autistic, and he really enjoys using his device for communication. Again, you can read about Asher on our website. And his mum, she's quite active on social media, so she shares lots of examples of how he's using his device. And one thing she talks a lot about is how he's using it for learning as well as communication. So it's really supporting him to communicate, but he's doing things like, you can see in the picture, he's got numbers, the number grid on Supercore, really enjoying using the numbers for supporting his literacy, but also, his numeracy, but also his literacy. So we'll hear more examples later on, but he's using lots of different grids in Supercore, and some of those are really helping with his literacy development. Next, I want to introduce you to Jamie. So you might immediately notice that he is not a child, he's not 5 years old, but I wanted to talk about Jamie because it's really important that we're thinking about literacy for people at any age, and it doesn't have to just be something we're thinking about for children who are at school. So Jamie has cerebral palsy and severely dysarthric speech. But he didn't start using an AAC device until he was 36. And when he started to use his device, he was using symbols, and that was what he was relying on. But since he started using AAC and using symbols, he has been developing his literacy, and he now uses a grid set with some text and some symbols. And again, we'll get some more specific examples later on, but he if you weren't able to attend our recent 24 hours of AAC conference, then you've still got time, I think, to go and access some of the earlier talks, but he gave our keynote presentation. And in that presentation, he was talking about his journey with AAC, including his journey with literacy, and talking about how learning literacy has been so important for him to be increasing his vocabulary. He's been learning new words, and that has also been really helping his independence. Anita mentioned that earlier on, and the importance that literacy can have. So Jamie is, he's hugely independent now, and he presents regularly at events, and he works, and it's just been so important for him. So I really wanted to share that example, as well as thinking about our younger AAC learners.
Okay, so on to thinking about what literacy development actually looks like. So there are lots of different models of literacy development, and I'm sure you'll be familiar with some of them, but broadly speaking, they all cover the same sorts of areas and same sorts of skills. So we've divided them up into 6 areas that we're going to look at today, and I'll show you what they are as a preview, and then we're going to go into each one in more detail. If I can click the right button. So we start off by thinking about developing an awareness of sounds, then an awareness of text, then learning the letters and sounds and how they relate to one another, then single word reading, reading for meaning, and writing for meaning. So this is the 6 skill areas that we have divided these things into, but as I said, there are different models that sort of divide them up differently, but it's all talking really about the same sorts of skills you need to develop literacy. So starting with an awareness of sounds, this is really can be considered a pre-literacy skill. So it's something that you need in order to engage with letters and sounds, which we'll see later on. And it can come into play much earlier than you might think of someone starting their literacy journey. Even as, a very young child, someone might be developing this awareness of sounds, which allows them to listen or attend to different sounds, to start to tell the difference between sounds, distinguish one sound from another, and eventually to start to recognize a range of sounds. They might, for example, describe the sounds that they're hearing. Maybe it's a loud sound or a quiet sound. Is it a long sound? Is it the same or different? But really spending that time focusing on the skill of listening to sounds, being aware of the different sounds, is so important for later literacy development. And one of the ways that we support this skill in our grid vocabularies is in the sounds grid in Supercore, which you can see here on the left of the slide. This grid uses the play sound command in grid, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail later. But what it means is that each time you select any of the cells on this grid, instead of hearing a spoken word, you'll hear a sound. So you'll hear a moo, the cow, or you'll hear the helicopter sound. And it's just a really lovely place for people to engage with different sounds, to explore them, listen to different types of sound, identify sounds, join in with those early pre-literacy activities.
I can just jump in. It's a really motivating grid. I've seen lots of children having a lot of fun with this grid, but also when we think about children's very early language development, a lot of those early words are actually the sounds to represent things. So just being able to explore this grid at quite an early stage, to lay that foundation for literacy is really important.
Okay, and then we move on to an awareness of text. So this is also sometimes known as print awareness, and it's just the idea that letters and words carry meaning. So they're not just little squiggles that you see, written on a page or written on your screen. They actually mean something. They can help refer to different things in the world. And the best way that we can support learners to develop this skill is to make sure that they are seeing words in the environment around them. And those might be words with symbols, they might be labels on classroom equipment, or road signs, or the writing on food packaging or on their toys. But it's also exploring different types of texts. So sharing books, sharing magazines, looking at websites. If you think about typically developing children, I think about my 1-year-old at home. We're sharing books with her long before we're expecting her to read anything herself. She's still seeing that we're reading the words on the page, and that they carry some meaning. So just starting to attend to written word is a really, again, an important early skill in literacy development.
I was going to say, I've seen that with my 3-year-old, going from looking at a book together, and you can see that your child is just completely ignoring those funny squiggles and then just looking at the pictures, and then you do start to see a bit of a shift that sometimes the child is being asked to turn the page of the book and they're actually waiting until you've stopped pointing to the words that you're reading. So it's that early foundation,
or even starting to recognize when the book is the wrong way up, because they can see that the text is not the right way up. Those sort of early skills show that someone is engaging with written language. And one way this is supported in our grid vocabularies, again in Supercore, but also in some of our other vocabularies, is in the arrangement of the cells. So you'll see later when we look at Supercore that the cell label, so the written word, is at the top of the cell and the symbol or the picture is underneath. And that's so that when you're pointing or modeling with a vocabulary, as you can see in this picture here, it might be that your finger is covering up the symbol, but the word is still accessible. So you can still engage with that written text. You can still start to make the link between that written word and what's being said or what's being referred to. Okay, then we come to learning letters and sounds. So this is often considered as the traditional part of literacy learning. It's all those skills around actually being able to read words and start to spell words. But as we've seen, there are two whole skills to consider before we've even got to this point. As we'll see in a moment, not everyone necessarily even comes through this point. So it's important to know that whilst we're talking about these in order, that's not the way that everyone will learn literacy, and it's not necessary to have all of the steps in this order that we're presenting them. So this skill area includes things like sound blending, so that's putting together two or more individual speech sounds to form a whole word. Phoneme segmenting is breaking down the sounds in a word so that you can figure out what letters actually make that word up. Letter sound correspondence is learning, well, this written letter can make this sound, and sometimes there are multiple sounds that one letter can make. But learning how those pair up is really important. And then decoding written words, so that's here's 3 or 4 or 5 letters on the word in a word. How do we break that down so that we can understand what this word says? And there's loads of practical ways that you can practice these skills, both in a classroom and outside of a classroom. And it might start with something as simple as identifying the first letter of someone's name. So my older daughter loves to talk about the first letter in her name, and she spots it all around us, if we're out walking and sees it on a street sign, or the letters that we have in the bath, and she can say, this is my letter. So finding the letter that someone's name starts with, grouping words that start with the same sound or the same letter, even the game I Spy, we can say I spy something that begins with B, and then the learner's starting to find things around them that start with B.
You'll have to tell us if you have that in Denmark. Yeah, if it might be called something different. But yeah, it's really popular game.
Absolutely. And there are some features as well in our vocabularies and in Grid which support this area of learning, but also support users to engage with more traditional phonics sessions by using different areas. So we'll look at them in more detail, but one thing that we are just in the process of adding to Danish Supercore, and it will be available very soon, is a phonetic keyboard as part of Supercore. So Daisy will be showing you that in a moment in Grid, but it allows Supercore users to join in with building up words using individual letter sounds. And another feature that's really important to consider is the speak as you type settings in Grid. So that's the idea that you can choose individual letters or sounds to build up a word, and then when you have a complete word, you'll hear the whole word spoken, and that really mimics the experience that speaking children have when they're learning phonics, of sounding out a word and then saying the whole word cat, and that difference between the letters that make something up and the whole word. And you can then explore the different speak as you type settings in Grid to have a go with that.
Yeah. Hopefully that's the same example in English and in Finnish. And just to say as well that the speak as you type settings, the default is actually the most useful one. So you will already automatically, as you spell out words on the keyboard, once you've written a word and you've pressed space, you'll hear that word spoken.
Okay. So the next skill area is single word reading. Or whole word recognition is another way to refer to this skill area, and it's the idea that you might, over time, as you become more familiar with individual words, you might recognize a word without having to sound out each letter or each collection of letters within the word. And if you think about your experience of reading as a literate adult, what you're doing most of the time is whole word recognition. You're only really going to be sounding out words if they're unfamiliar or new words. So whole word recognition is a lot faster. It leads to more fluent reading. And as Daisy said earlier, some people develop literacy in this way and skip the decoding step altogether. They just immediately start to recognize whole words. And for some people, the decoding step can be quite a long journey, and for others, it's just a brief step until you get to whole word recognition. So again, within our vocabularies, we support this by often showing high frequency words with no symbol. So we'll see that in Supercore a little bit later. There are some words in the core grid that don't have a symbol. But it's also something that you could do with individual users as they become more familiar with particular words that are important to them. So an example might be their own name. You might want to add that to their device without a photograph, because you're encouraging them to recognize the written form of their name. And as they become more familiar with other words, maybe mum and dad, you could remove those symbols as well. So it encourages people to engage with the written word rather than focusing on the symbol.
And you can see that example in the image here. This is someone's user. This is someone's like family grid, and they've got quite a few names on there which haven't got an image associated with it. And being able to recognise your own written name is a really early literacy target for children. So yeah, it's one that we should be trying to help our users with too.
Okay, so I was going to say, like, once you have all those skills in place, but actually, as we discussed earlier, these skills don't need to go in a particular order or progression. And this idea of reading for meaning, of enjoying reading, of understanding what texts are talking about, can come earlier than being able to sound out or recognise individual words. But the idea of reading for meaning is that you're making sense of the words, the sentences, or the phrases that you are reading. Maybe you're starting to make sense and to understand larger pieces of text, like a whole story or a news article. And what we like to encourage is for individuals to engage with the text and enjoy the process of reading. And that might be shared reading, as you can see in this photo here, where it's possible that individual is not reading the words themselves, but the adult is helping to read them. But the sort of skills that we can support are things like identifying key details within the text, encouraging users to ask questions and to retell parts of stories, so that you know that they're really understanding what's being said. So not testing, not just asking people, well, what's that and what does this say, but encouraging someone to engage with the story and say, oh, what's going to happen next? What do you think? How do you think that character's feeling? How would you feel if that, there's lots of different ways you can engage with a story to encourage someone to think about what they've just read.
And it's fostering that love of reading and books as well. That's so important. And thinking back to Vega and how she just loves books and reading, and that's really going to help her literacy journey because she's already got that motivation.
Absolutely. And so when we jump into grid in a moment, you'll see the story grids in Supercore, which are a really lovely pre-made resource, but with space to add your own as well to encourage that discussion around stories, and also the Read With Me accessible stories, which we'll also have a look at. And then finally, alongside all these other skills, we want to encourage learners to be writing for meaning. So you might have learnt the skill of writing individual words, and we talked right back at the beginning about what literacy allows you to do and what you can do once you're literate. And a lot of that comes from writing for different reasons. So it might be writing shopping lists, or it might be writing short phrases to share your news, what you did at the weekend, where you went on holiday. Maybe you're starting to write stories, either about your own life or more made up stories or poems. And these can be written independently, or maybe they're part of a shared writing opportunity. And shared writing can take place in a kind of a classroom setting where maybe a group or a whole class are taking turns in choosing words and building up a story or building up a poem together. Or maybe it's a shared writing opportunity just between an AAC user and their communication partner, and you're working together to build up a story. And we'll see an example of that in a moment. And it's important to remember that writing doesn't have to be with a pen. I think, we're all here as part of an AAC webinar. We understand that, but just remembering that for our AAC learners, writing might be selecting whole words from their AAC vocabulary, or it might be starting to use those keyboards to build up their own words. Obviously, as part of writing for meaning, you can also be exploring those different written forms of communication. So text messages, emails, and again, you could do that through the accessible apps that are part of Grid, or you could do it that you're writing, the AAC user is writing something and someone else is maybe sending that message for them. And one of the really supportive features in Grid that can help someone at this stage of their learning is symbolized predictions, because these allow users to explore new words. Maybe they're putting in 1 or 2 letters and then seeing what words pop up. Maybe they know what the start of a word is, but they're not sure how to finish it. So it can help, it can be a strategy for that early literacy learning as well. And we'll have a look at that in a moment, right now, in fact. And did you want me to put that slide?
Yeah, so we'll just have a quick look here first, and then we'll go into Grid and see what this actually looks like. But thinking about those literacy opportunities that we've just been talking about, we're going to look at the sounds grid in Supercore. We'll look at phonetic keyboards and how you can use those. We'll look at the stories grids in Supercore. We'll look at how you can create a story or write a story in VocoChat, shopping list grid, and we'll have a look at the Read With Me accessible stories. If we just have a look at the next slide, so I'm going to talk about all of these things as we go into Grid. So we'll then talk about some of the features that you see and how you can use them on these different grids. So the play sound command, symbol supported word predictions, the speak as you type settings Anita's mentioned, we'll see those in action. Find word command, I'm going to tell you my favourite way to use that. And we'll also have a look at the whiteboard. So I'm going to take over screen sharing and show you Grid. Will work now. Okay, so let's start off in Supercore and have a look at our first grid. So I want to start by showing you the sounds grid, which is in topics. So I'll obviously say all the words in English, and then we're going to go to. Thank you. I did just miss it. Thank you so much. As I say, I wish I spoke Danish. So, and then we're going to have a look at the sounds grid. So this is that grid of environmental sounds that Anita was talking about earlier on. This will be the first test. Hopefully you all heard that. So we've got this grid, lots of different sounds, obviously. The trumpet is a loud sound, it's quite a long sound. That was quite a short sound and it was a little bit quieter. So just being able to explore those early sounds. And if I go into edit mode, what you can see is it's using the play sound command. And you could, if you wanted to, add additional sounds. So we've got a range of animal noises. Maybe you have a cat or an animal at home and you want to record the noise, so you can create your own cell using the record. So that will just use the microphone on your own device. So it's really quick to do.
There is also a library of sounds, which is where some of these ones have come from. So you can see there's an option for browse.
They are all set up so it's a blank cell, but it already has the command on, so you haven't got to go and find anything like that. So as Anita said, you can go into browse and have a look. So yeah, sound of bacon frying or an apple being bitten or an egg cracking. There's lots of sounds already in here for you to go and explore, as well as being able to make your own. Okay, so that is the sounds grid. And the next thing I want to show you is the keyboards grid. So obviously thinking about literacy, a keyboard is essential. So that's why we always have a keyboard in our symbol vocabularies. And in Supercore, we've actually got a range of different keyboards. So I'll show you that in a minute. But when you first go to your keyboard grid, it will look like this. I need to mention the phonics keyboard that is coming in an update. So I have got that here to show you. So if we were to just start exploring sounds. Ooh. So I'm selecting letters and exploring those sounds and starting to learn the association between the letter and the sound it makes. And actually, in this case, I've written a word. And the symbol has automatically appeared, which is reinforcing that the letters can be put together into words and that those words have meaning. And the meaning of this one, in this scenario, is mouse. So, I could speak it. Yes, let me do that. Let's hear those lovely sounds. So I can use my speak button, or if I press space, I'll hear the word spoken because I've got to the end of my word.
And just to say as well that even before someone is able to sort of put those letters together, this is the place, this keyboard I think could be really useful in, for example, phonics sessions, joining in. I know here in the UK, some of our phonics programs include like songs that go along with different sounds, or we do lots of games where like and practice repeating it. And this just allows ASC users to join in with that type of activity if that's something that's going on in their classroom.
Yeah, just that early exploration of sounds and just giving access to a phonetic keyboard and saying, have a play, see what different sounds they make, put them together, and you might even make up nonsense words. And that can also be really motivating to just, oh, it's not even a real word, but doesn't it sound funny when we put these sounds together? And then, yeah, as I was demonstrating, you can then be moving towards those really early words that have got a clear sound correspondence to, spelling out the word.
And also to add here, and it's not in our notes, so I'm just going to surprise Daisy with it, but these are all obviously individual letters that make individual sounds. Particularly in phonics programs, at some point we often introduce digraphs, which is 2 letters together, or maybe even 3 letters together at times, that can make their own sound. So for example, in English, I'm sorry, I don't have any Danish examples, but in English, if we put S and H together, it's sh. That's not a sound that's currently represented on this keyboard. So something you can do in Grid is using the play sound command that Daisy showed a moment ago. You could make a cell that has S and H on and record your own speech sound, shh. And then an ASC learner can start to explore those digraphs as well. So it's not something that we have built in because this is a standard keyboard, but it's certainly something you could add if someone you are working with is starting to explore that level of literacy.
Yeah, definitely. So another thing I wanted to show you from the keyboard is the find word feature. So you might already know about the find word feature, you might not, but if you do know about it, you might know about it from accessing it via the menu bar and going to find word here, and it's similar in Grid for iPad. But actually, I really encourage you to use the keyboard anytime you're trying to find a word, and it might be a word you genuinely think, I don't know where this word is in Supercore or VocoChat, whatever grid set you're using, and you want to find it, but do that with the learner. So you're going to the keyboard and you're saying, okay, the word I need to find is, I want to drink, but I don't know what grid to go to. So I'm actually going to sound out E. And again, I've got that reinforcement because I'm seeing the symbol appear there. And if I choose find word, it's going to support me to navigate to where that word is. So as well as finding where the word is, I've also had a bit of reinforcement that the word is made up of letters and that's how I need to find the word. So then I can go into my topics, go into my drinks grid, and there is the word. Right? Perfect. So it's like just, and that's an opportunity. You're just trying to find a word for communication, but it's just another example of how we can be thinking about literacy in the back of our minds at the same time. So you're going to go back to the keyboards now, and I want to show you some of the other keyboards that I mentioned we have already built into the grid set. So they're kind of behind the scenes, so you don't see them, but it gives you different options for the learner that you're working with. So if I go to other keyboards, you've actually got the ABC layout that we've just seen, QWERTY layout, so more like your physical keyboard on your computers and on touch screens. And then there's a scanning frequency keyboard for switch users. So if I choose QWERTY, so maybe the learner that you're working with is more familiar with the physical keyboard. Maybe they're using touch access and they might have seen pop-up keyboards on their iPad or other device. So this time I'm going to choose the one that has prediction cells on. I've got a choice of hearing the sound of the letter, so the phonetics, or I can hear the letter name, or I can have no sound. I'm going to choose the phonetics because that's really helpful for supporting literacy. So now with that same example, I can see it in the predictions. And let's think of a longer word that we can use to see when it would come up in the predictions. So I've been drinking my coffee here today. Maybe I'm going to try and spell that word out. Hey. So maybe I've started to know some of the letter sounds in that word, and I can start writing my writing the word, but I haven't got to write the whole one because I can now see it here with the word, but also the symbol. So it's helping me to know that I've found the right word. Perfect. When I select it, there it is. Anything else on keyboards?
No, I think that it's worth pointing out at this point that one of our users that we spoke about earlier, Jamie, who's an adult user who still relies at least partly on symbols. I know that he uses a lot of symbol-supported text predictions in this way. So he kind of might know the initial sound of a word or the first few letters of a word, but not be entirely sure about the spelling. And so he can come to probably not a super grid, but a similar keyboard grid with symbol-supported predictions and start to type out that word, and then he's like, oh yeah, there it is. And the symbol can support him to know that that is the right word, the right spelling.
And we have got a setting in grid as well, which I will just quickly show you. If I go into settings and I go to grid set settings, we have got this option of read and write with symbols. And we can turn it off. So sometimes there might be some scenarios where you want to use the keyboard with predictions, but you don't want to have the symbol support there. So it really depends on the activities, but it's just to let you know that that option is there. So if I turn that off, you'll see that the symbols disappear. So you've still got the symbols on the cells, but when you're typing, you won't have the symbols there. So I'm going to put them back on for now. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to show you was our stories grid. Stories grids. So there are lots of pre-made grids in Supercore for talking about stories and really helping with that engagement with writing. So even before we're reading, we can be engaging with stories and building that love of literacy. So if I go to our school grids and I go to stories, and then starting with, when I first go there, I've still got all of my core words on the left-hand side. Those don't change. But now I've got some specific words for talking about stories. So I can say story, I can say again, I want to choose a story, let's read, listen. So really, really important words, whatever book you're reading. But if I select more, I've got some example stories here and some blanks, so you can add your own. But let's go into this story here, which is a story we also know in England. So the three Billy Goats story, and in the grid, I've still got these general words on the right-hand side, so I can say things like again and it's different. But I've got some specific words that are really going to be useful for making comments and joining in when the story is being read. So, so just being able to join in with those repeated phrases in a story is so motivating for any child listening to a story and starting to predict where in the story those repeated phrases come, being able to just make a comment, and yeah, talk about different things that they can see in the story. So this is just an example, but you've also got template grids in there as well. Okay, so that's the story grids. So I'm actually going to now jump out of Supercore just to show you some examples in VocoChat. So all the things we were just looking at in Supercore 50 are also there in 30, but just with a reduced cell count. But let's have a look at VocoChat. So we talked about writing for meaning and that idea that it doesn't have to be with a pen. It can actually be about choosing words and putting them together and telling a story. And in VocoChat, one of the communication pathways that you have, the message pathways, is can I tell you something?
Jeg vil gerne fortælle noget.
And then we've got can I tell you a story?
En historie.
And again, it's similar. We've got a number of template grids that you can use to edit and make your own. When we think about a story, it's not like the Billy Goat's Gruff story, but more like a wedding that I went to last year and telling you the story of it was my brother's wedding and he was, who was there and where it was and maybe something funny that happened at the wedding or something fun that you did, and being able to tell that to many different people because it's an enjoyable story to tell. But it might also just be something you did at the weekend. And we can work with someone who's using AAC to build a story together. So rather than maybe finding out from the child's parents they did this, programming it into the device, doing it with the child. So going into the story grid, we've just got an example photo here that you'll see. So you can see it's the park. And maybe we talk to the user and say, okay, so who was in the story? Who did you see at the weekend? And then we can use the vocabulary to find that information out. So we've got prompts like who, where, and when. So let's go to the people grid. So who is in the story? Someone in your family. And then maybe the AAC user might choose. Okay, so now I know when I'm editing that grid, I'm going to put in, okay, it was your brother, and where did you go? And you can go to places. And they might choose somewhere outside.
Udenfor. Park.
And they went to the park. So when you're going back to
Jeg vil gerne fortælle noget. En historie.
your story grid, and you're going into edit the grid, here, I know that I'm going to change the label, and I'm probably going to put in a picture. I might just use the symbol for now. So I can edit it to put in the information that the learner has told me, and I can do that with them. So they are actually writing the story.
And you can also, if you just click back onto that cell, Daisy, you can put a longer sentence behind the cell as well. So you could switch the cell label, turn the cell label to off, and you might say, I went with my brother And then in the next it's one, we went to the park near our house, but maybe you just want to keep 1 or 2 keywords on the cell for the user to identify, but you can have a longer sentence so they're able to tell that story with more confidence. And what's lovely about these grids is when all of the cells are filled up with that information, it's a really fail-safe place for them to come, because they can come to the story, and whichever cell they choose, they're sharing information with their communication partner. They're telling you part of the story. You don't have to do it in a particular order. You know, there's no wrong answer here. It's just a really lovely way for someone to share their stories and tell their stories, but using it as an opportunity for shared writing just makes it even more meaningful to build those literacy skills.
Yeah, it's a great example of that overlap between communication and literacy, and it's something that we all do. You know, on a Monday, when you go to work, and the first question, usually, what someone will ask is, "How was your weekend?" And you tell a story. You might say, "I went here with this person on this day. This happened." And it's just such an everyday part of communication. So that's an example of stories, and you can do exactly the same thing in Supercore. We have the news cell, which is blank, and the idea is very much that you're adding in those stories, but you can go through to people and places and build that story with a C user. Okay, another writing example that we have in VocoChat is, again, it's in places that we just went into, and it's in shops and shopping list.
Indkøbsliste.
So I know this is a very regular part of my life, is writing a shopping list of the things that I need, and you know, thinking about independence and supporting that for AAC learners. It's got pre-populated with some examples, but you could, when you're writing a shopping list, be, you know, picking up the thing, oh, this is nearly run out of coffee, and looking for the word on that packet to just reinforce the literacy and the written word when you're then writing it onto your shopping list in the grid.
And I think just remembering that we talk about modelling all the time when we think about communication with AAC, and actually literacy in AAC is really the same thing. You need to take all those opportunities to model, like, where would you use your literacy skills? How can you use them? Maybe the AAC user is not able to actually edit this grid themselves, but you, as their communication partner, can be like, "Oh, we need more coffee." And you can be spelling it out and showing them how you're using your literacy skills, so that then when they are at that point and they are ready to, they can be applying those same skills because they've had it modelled.
So, you know, when you've got your keyboard up, and you can be, and if they're a direct access and they can access, maybe encouraging them to try and find the first letter, or to match the letter if you've got the object there. So some users might actually be able to help with editing and add those words in. Okay, I've got 2 last examples before we will come back into our presentation to just wrap things up. So the next one I wanted to show was the whiteboard. So this was added, I think, a year and a half ago now. And it can be found in the accessible apps. It is only suitable for touch access. So yeah, it would just be for direct access users, but it's in Windows and in Grid for iPad. And we were talking about Asher earlier on, and this has been really motivating for him to do some of that early writing and to just be writing. So maybe I'll just, I think I'm on my coffee example, but just starting to write, and it might not be that you're writing a whole word. You might even just be doing some scribble and just some early mark making and exploring, or you might be drawing a picture and you can use different colours. This can also be a really motivating activity, and it's very simple. It is simply just like your digital pen and paper.
And as with anything in Grid, you can copy those grids into your communication vocabulary very easily by doing add grids from another grid set. So this is not currently built into Supercore, but there's nothing, or Workshop, but there's nothing to stop you bringing these grids in.
Yeah, I was just going into edit mode just to show you that it is just like any other grid set where it's just made up of, you know, a series of cells. But like Anita said, you could just pull that whole grid in. And then the final example I want to show you is it's not communication grid sets, but it's just to show you something that we have in grid in Danish, and that's the read with me grid sets, which I think have a different name than in Danish, but these are a set of accessible storybooks that we've built into grid and have had lots of positive feedback about. So I'll just go into one to show you. You can go straight into the story. Then levels, so the earlier stories are simpler, there's not as many words, and the words are not as long. And then it goes all the way up to level 5. So if I go into a level 1 story, if you've got someone actually using any access method, so they might be using eye gaze, if they look at these words here, nothing's going to happen. You've got to look at the word at the beginning of the sentence. It's really encouraging you to keep that left to right and reading the words in order. And reading one word at a time, and then you can turn the page and you can go through the whole story. And yeah, as I say, these have been really popular. They've also got some activities that go with them. So these are all the different pages. You can jump to a particular page, but you can also go to learning resources. And I won't talk through them because there are loads, but yeah, lots of different ways to engage with the story and engage with writing, like Anita was saying earlier on. So you can go through and do those activities. So do have a look, they are included in grid.
And I know we're going to do a quick refresh on our user stories that we spoke about earlier, but Vega in particular loves these stories, and I think one of the things we were told is that she loves reading in general, but she wants to be in control of the reading. She doesn't want to be read to, she wants to be the one doing the reading, and so these grid sets allow her to do just that.
Yeah.
She controls the pace, she chooses the words, and for her that is so much more motivating than listening to a story that someone else is reading. There's nothing wrong with that, but for her particularly, she wants to be in charge. So I think it's lovely to be able to support that for our AAC users.
I've just seen a question in the chat. Is it possible to change the size of the letters? Yes, absolutely. In grid, you can change the font size. That's really, really quick and easy to do. Just jump back. Okay, so I'm aware of the time. So
skip through these.
Yeah, these are all the things that we have just looked at. Lots of different features. I think we talked about all of these. And so the question you've asked is a great one. I didn't talk about how you can change the size of the letters, but I did want to say that in our symbol vocabularies, you might notice that the font size is quite large compared to some AAC systems where the writing is quite small. And that was really intentional. We did that on purpose to make sure that our symbol learners are seeing the written words and that they are visible, particularly if you're working with someone with a visual impairment. We want them to be able to see those words because really we want to be encouraging them to start recognising and reading those words. So that's why they are as big as they are. You can make them bigger, but you could make them smaller if you have someone with really good vision. Yeah, okay, so thinking back briefly to our user stories, I just want to highlight particular examples of how these AAC users have used the features in their vocabularies. So Vega, the Read With Me story grids, she has loved being the person to read the stories and having that voice output, and she's absolutely loved that. And Asher has really enjoyed the play sounds grid. He's using the phonetic keyboard and using the whiteboard. And his mum shared a lovely example of him using the whiteboard to write mama. And yes, that was obviously really, really meaningful for her. But he has been using that to write, to draw, and to start some early literacy. And then, as Anita was sharing earlier on, that Jamie is using this like hybrid approach. He's got a keyboard, he's got prediction cells, and sometimes those symbols there are really useful. Sometimes he isn't needing the symbols, he's recognizing the words. And he's also got some categories of word lists. So if he knows that he wants to talk about a particular topic, maybe he wants to talk about sports, he'll go into that grid, that list of words, and he's able to look through the list of words in that category to find the one he needs.
Okay, so just to summarise then, the general themes that we've been talking about today around learning literacy for ASC users. And I think the bottom line is it's never too late. We often talk about learning literacy, thinking about younger children, children who are school aged. But as we saw from the example of Jamie, that journey with literacy can start at any point in someone's life. And there's no point where you say, actually, they've missed that window. So it's never too late to get started. We know that daily opportunities, building it into a routine, getting it in to be a regular part of everyday life supports longer term progress rather than it being a once a week discrete session. We want it to be something that's built in every day, in the classroom, out of the classroom, in daily life, at home, wherever the ASC user is. There are so many opportunities and activities that you can be engaging in to support literacy development. And as we said at the beginning, literacy is not all or nothing. You don't have to be fully literate to benefit from some of those other literacy skills. If you're able to identify initial sounds of words, if you're able to use a keyboard with symbolized prediction and that helps you to find the words you need, or maybe you have whole word recognition, but you still can't actually sound out new words, that's fine. All of those skills are supportive of increased independence and increased success. So it's not an all or nothing. And there are so many different skills to support progression, and progression will look different for everyone. And I think that brings us to any questions.